My grandpa spent $45,000 to join our family trip to Europe. He had been saving for years, skipping out on things for himself, all because he wanted one last great adventure with us. But the moment we arrived at the airport, everything fell apart. We were standing by the boarding gate when my mom turned to him and said, "Dad, I forgot your ticket. You'll have to go home." Her voice was sharp and final, like she wasn't even embarrassed to say it out loud. My grandpa's face went pale. He pulled out the envelope where he had kept every receipt, his hands shaking. "Clara, I gave you the money. You promised me everything was taken care of." My mom folded her arms and whispered, "You'll only hold us back. Just go home. We'll tell people you weren't feeling well." My dad didn't say a word. My sister rolled her eyes and muttered, "We're going to miss the flight." And in that moment I realized this wasn't an accident. They had planned this. They wanted to leave him behind. I looked at my grandpa. His eyes were watering, not from anger, but from the kind of heartbreak you only see in someone who has spent their whole life putting family first. I couldn't let him walk away humiliated and alone. So while the rest of my family marched toward the gate, I grabbed his bag and said, "I'm staying with you." Everyone stopped and stared. My mom's face twisted in disbelief, but I didn't care. I walked out of that airport beside my grandpa, not knowing that one choice would change everything. 4 weeks later, when my family came back from Europe, they nearly collapsed when they saw who I had married while they were gone. Before that day at the airport, everything in our family looked perfect from the outside. We were the kind of family neighbors envied. My mom, Clara, loved to organize big trips and dinners that made us look polished and close-knit. My dad, Victor, worked long hours but always made sure we had nice things. My younger sister, Maya, was excited about graduating high school and already planning Instagram photos she wanted to take in Paris. And then there was my grandpa, Harold. He was 72 years old, a little slower on his feet, but full of energy when it came to his family. If you asked anyone in our town about him, they would tell you he was the kindest man they knew. He was the type of person who carried extra sandwiches in his truck in case he saw someone hungry by the roadside. He never forgot birthdays, and he always gave the warmest hugs that made you feel like nothing could hurt you. He was the one who taught me how to ride my bike without training wheels, standing in the driveway for hours, encouraging me with that deep, steady voice of his. "You got this, Evan. Trust yourself." When my mom announced the family was planning a 4-week trip across Europe, Italy, France, Germany, Spain, it sounded like a dream. She went on and on about luxury hotels, private tours, and how this would be the trip of a lifetime. Grandpa's eyes lit up like I had never seen before. He had spent most of his life working in construction, never once leaving the country. The farthest he had ever traveled was to Florida for a wedding when he was in his 40s. For him, this was a chance to finally see the world he had only read about in books and watched in movies. The problem was money. The trip was expensive, and while my parents could cover their share, Grandpa would need to pay his own way. I remember him sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, going over numbers again and again. He had a modest pension, some savings, and a little land outside of town. Finally, he made a decision. He sold part of that land he had cared for his whole life, just to afford this trip. When he handed the check to my mom, his hands were trembling, but his smile was so wide, he said, "Clara, I want to come along. This is my dream. Thank you for including me." I could see my mom's tight smile in that moment. She said, "Of course, Dad. It'll be wonderful to have you." But the way she avoided his eyes told me something was off. My dad stayed quiet as usual, his lips pressed together. At the time, I thought maybe they were just worried about how he'd manage the long flights and packed schedules. I had no idea that their intentions were much colder. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Grandpa was like a kid again. He bought a guidebook for every country on the itinerary. He kept reading little facts out loud during dinner. Evan, did you know the Eiffel Tower was once considered an eyesore? Or, Maya, there's a gelato shop in Florence that's been open for 300 years. We have to try it. He even started practicing phrases in different languages, sitting in his recliner repeating, Buongiorno, bonjour, guten Tag. I teased him for his accent, and he laughed, telling me he was going to charm every waiter in Europe. The night before the trip, he came to my room holding an old leather journal. I'm going to write everything down, Evan, he said. Every meal, every sight, every laugh. I want to remember this forever. He set the journal on my desk and smiled. But most of all, I'm glad you'll be there with me. Trips come and go, but sharing it with you will mean the most. I hugged him tightly, promising that this was going to be the best month of our lives. The next morning at the airport, we all gathered with our bags and passports. Grandpa wore his nicest shirt, the one he had saved for special occasions, tucked into pressed slacks. He had polished his shoes the night before, and he even wore the wristwatch his late wife had given him on their anniversary decades ago. He stood there with pride, looking like he belonged exactly where he was. From the outside, everything seemed fine. My mom was checking the tickets and passports, my dad was making sure the bags were weighed correctly, and my sister was already taking selfies against the huge airport windows. But I noticed something strange. My mom barely spoke to Grandpa. She answered him with clipped replies, like his excitement was bothering her. Yes, Dad, we'll see the Colosseum. Yes, Dad, I know you want to take pictures. She acted like every word from him was a chore. Grandpa, on the other hand, didn't notice, or maybe chose not to. He just kept smiling, patting me on the shoulder, pointing out planes as they taxied down the runway. Can you believe we'll be on one of those soon? He asked, his eyes glowing. For him, the world was finally opening up. For me, it felt like something was closing in, though I couldn't explain why. Looking back now, I realized that all of his hope, all of his trust, was built on a foundation that was already cracked. He believed we were a family who wanted him there. He believed my mom had arranged everything fairly and honestly. He believed that after all the sacrifices he had made, he finally deserved this. I wanted to believe it too. I had no idea that within an hour, standing at that very same airport, his dream would be ripped away by the very people he loved most. The announcement for boarding echoed through the airport, and everyone around us began lining up. Families gathered their children, couples held hands, and groups of tourists shuffled toward the gate with excitement buzzing in the air. My grandpa clutched his carry-on tighter, his smile as wide as a child on Christmas morning. He glanced at me and said, "This is it, Evan. I can finally check this off my bucket list." His voice cracked with emotion, and I could feel the weight of how much this moment meant to him. But as we approached the gate, my mom suddenly stopped walking. She turned to my grandpa with a look that was cold and unshaken. "Dad," she said, her tone clipped and final, "I forgot your ticket. You'll have to go home." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. My grandpa blinked in confusion, his mouth slightly open, waiting for her to laugh or correct herself. When she didn't, his hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope where he had kept his paperwork. He held it out, saying, "No, Clara, that's not possible. I gave you the money. I kept every receipt. Here, look." His voice was cracking, desperate, but she didn't even reach for the envelope. Instead, she crossed her arms and lowered her voice so only we could hear. "You're not coming? You'll slow us down, and I can't drag you through airports and trains for 4 weeks. Just go home. We'll tell people you weren't." Feeling well, I felt my chest tighten. The way she said it, calm, rehearsed, without hesitation, told me this was no mistake. This had been her plan all along. My dad stood silently at her side, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. My sister Maya groaned in frustration, muttering, "We're going to miss the flight." Just let him go home. Grandpa's face crumpled, as though her words had physically struck him. He looked at my dad for support, whispering, "Victor, say something." I sold my land. I trusted you both. But my dad stayed silent, avoiding his gaze. It was as if the man who had married my mom had disappeared completely, replaced by a shadow too afraid to speak. "Dad," my mom continued, her voice sharp, "stop making a scene. You'll be fine here. You don't belong on a trip like this." I could hardly process what I was hearing. This was the man who had raised her, who had worked his whole life to give her opportunities. This was the man who had spent every dollar he had left to share this trip with us. And here she was, discarding him like an inconvenience. My grandpa's hand shook so violently that the envelope slipped to the floor. He bent down slowly, his knees cracking, and picked it up with as much dignity as he could muster. When he stood back up, his eyes glistened with tears. "Clara," he whispered, his voice raw and broken, "I only wanted to be with my family. That's all I wanted." The sight of him standing there, humiliated in the middle of the airport while families bustled happily around us, sent a surge of anger through me. I looked at my mom, then at my dad, waiting for one of them to come to their senses. But their faces were stone. They had already made their decision. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let him walk out of that airport alone. I couldn't let him be tossed aside like his love and sacrifice meant nothing. I turned to my mom and said firmly, "If Grandpa isn't going, then I'm not going either." Her eyes widened, her lips curling into disbelief. "Evan, don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "You've been waiting for this trip as much as anyone. Don't throw it away over a stubborn old man." "He's not just an old man," I shot back. "He's my grandpa. He's the one person who's never let me down." Maya groaned louder this time. "You're seriously going to ruin this for all of us?" "Fine, stay behind if you want. Just don't expect us to wait for you." I picked up Grandpa's bag from beside his feet and slung it over my shoulder. "Come on, Grandpa." "We're leaving." He looked at me, stunned. His mouth opened to protest, but I squeezed his arm. "I'm not letting you go home alone," I whispered. His eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was gratitude mixed in with the heartbreak. My mom's voice cut through the air, sharp enough to draw stares from nearby passengers. "Evan, if you walk away, right now, don't expect any sympathy when you regret it." I didn't even turn back. I walked forward, pulling Grandpa gently beside me. He shuffled along, still dazed, still heartbroken, but no longer abandoned. Behind us, my family joined the boarding line without another word. As we stepped out of the terminal and back into the open air, Grandpa exhaled shakily. His shoulders slumped under the weight of what had just happened. "Evan," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." "You've been looking forward to this trip for months." I shook my head. "I wouldn't enjoy a second of it if it meant watching you get treated like that. We'll make our own trip, Grandpa. We'll figure it out." In that moment, I didn't care about Paris or Rome or any of the places I thought I wanted to see. All I cared about was walking beside him, holding on to the only family member who had ever truly been there for me. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I had made the only choice my heart could live with. When Grandpa and I walked out of that airport, the weight of what just happened pressed down on us. He shuffled slowly beside me, his eyes still red and swollen from tears. His grip on his bag was so tight his knuckles turned white. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. The noise of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and cheerful travelers faded behind us, leaving only the sound of Grandpa's uneven breaths. Finally, he broke the silence. "Evan, you gave up your chance to see the world. You should have gone with them." His voice was heavy, like he was blaming himself. I stopped walking and turned to him. "I don't care about Europe, Grandpa. I care about you. I couldn't stand by and watch them humiliate you like that. You've always been there for me, and now I'm here for you." For a long moment he just looked at me. His shoulders, hunched with shame a few minutes earlier, straightened slightly. He nodded, and a small flicker of relief crossed his face. "Thank you, Evan." I don't know what I did to deserve you, but thank you." We went back to his house that day, both of us exhausted. His old recliner creaked as he sank into it, and I sat across from him. The silence in the room felt different than before. It wasn't heavy with humiliation anymore. It was filled with a quiet resolve, the kind that settles in after you make a choice you know you cannot undo. The following days were awkward at first. My phone buzzed with messages from Maya, short and dismissive. "You're crazy. You'll regret this. We're in Rome, and it's amazing." My mom didn't text at all. My dad sent a single message. "We'll talk when we get back." I deleted it without replying. Grandpa tried to go about his usual routines, watering the garden, reading the newspaper, making coffee, but I could see the sadness still lingering. I wanted to pull him out of it. One morning, I said, "Grandpa, let's do something different today. We don't need Europe to make memories. Let's make our own adventure right here." He chuckled, shaking his head. "What kind of adventure can two people have in a small town?" "You'd be surprised," I said, grabbing his keys. "Come on, trust me." That day, we drove out to a nearby lake he had always loved but rarely visited. We rented a small rowboat and spent the afternoon drifting on the water. Grandpa's laughter echoed across the lake when I nearly tipped us trying to reel in a fish. He leaned back, the sun warming his face, and for the first time since the airport, he looked peaceful. Over the next 2 weeks, we found joy in places we had ignored before. We explored little diners on the edge of town, tried foods neither of us had eaten, and even went to a local cultural festival where the streets were filled with music, dancing, and handmade crafts. Grandpa carried his old leather journal everywhere, writing down every detail. One evening, while we sat on a park bench eating kettle corn, he showed me a page. I thought I needed Europe to fill this journal. Turns out, I just needed the right company. That night at the festival was when everything changed. Grandpa noticed a booth for a local charity that helped elderly veterans and their families. He stopped to chat with the volunteers, his natural kindness drawing them in. That was where I met Elena. She was 26 with bright brown eyes and a smile that could calm a storm. She was handing out pamphlets, her hands busy, but her voice warm as she explained the organization's work. I offered to help her carry a box of supplies to the back, and we struck up a conversation. She told me about her passion for helping others, how her own grandfather had inspired her to give back. There was something about her that felt genuine in a way I hadn't experienced before. Grandpa, always quick to notice, pulled me aside after we left. "She's special," he said, raising his eyebrows knowingly. I laughed it off, but deep down I knew he was right. Over the next few days, I kept finding reasons to see her again. We met for coffee, then lunch, then an evening walk by the river. Every time she asked about Grandpa, and every time she insisted on joining us for the little adventures we had started creating. With Elena around, Grandpa seemed more alive than ever. He joked with her, shared stories about his younger years, and even taught her how to bait a fishing hook when we went back to the lake. She listened to him with respect and affection, something my mom had never shown him. Watching them bond made me realize how different life could be when surrounded by people who actually cared. By the 3rd week, I knew my connection with Elena was more than just a passing spark. We talked late into the night about our values, our dreams, and what family meant to us. She understood me in a way no one else had, and she accepted Grandpa as part of the package without hesitation. One evening, while Grandpa sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elna and I sat beside him. I took her hand, feeling the weight of the decision forming inside me. I glanced at Grandpa, and he gave me a small, knowing nod, like he could read my thoughts before I even spoke. The humiliation at the airport had been the worst moment of his life, but standing by him had opened a door I never expected. While my family was chasing landmarks across Europe, I was building something real at home. A choice that began out of loyalty to my grandpa was about to change the course of my entire future. The 4 weeks passed faster than I ever thought they could. While my family posted photos of Paris cafes and Rome's ancient ruins, I spent my days with Grandpa and Elena. We cooked meals together, visited places I had overlooked in my own hometown, and built bonds that felt deeper than anything a vacation could give me. By the final week, Elena and I knew we wanted to spend our lives together. It was sudden, yes, but every day with her had stripped away doubt and replaced it with certainty. Grandpa, grinning like a proud father, stood as my best man when Elena and I exchanged vows in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. There were no fancy decorations or exotic backdrops, but it was real, and it was ours. The day my family was due to return, Grandpa and I sat on the porch together. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet confidence about him. "They'll be here soon," he said. "Are you ready for this?" I tightened my grip on Elena's hand. More than ever. When the taxi pulled up, my mom was the first to step out. She wore designer sunglasses, her suitcase rolling neatly behind her. My dad followed, carrying extra bags, and my sister hopped out last, phone in hand, snapping a quick picture of the house she hadn't seen in a month. They looked sunburned and satisfied, glowing with the pride of having seen the world. Clara spotted me on the porch and smirked. "So, how was your little staycation, Evan? I hope you enjoyed babysitting." Her eyes flicked to Grandpa, and the disdain in her tone was sharp enough to sting. "You didn't miss much." "Europe was incredible, and I can't imagine dragging an old man through all of that. You should thank me." Her words rolled off me like rain against stone. I rose slowly, pulling Elena to her feet beside me. My mom's smirk faltered when she noticed her, then turned into suspicion. "Who's this?" I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "This is my wife, Elena. We got married while you were gone." The words hit like a thunderclap. My mom's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She staggered back a step, her suitcase slipping from her grip. My sister gasped so loudly it drew a stare from the taxi driver. My dad froze, his eyes widening as though he had seen a ghost. Grandpa stood proudly beside me, his arm around my shoulder. "I was his best man," he announced with a smile that radiated dignity. Clara found her voice at last, and it came out sharp and trembling. "You did what? Married her? You barely know this girl. Do you have any idea how reckless that is?" Elena stepped forward, calm and steady. "I may not know you well, Mrs. Moreno, but I know Evan. I know the way he treats people, the respect he shows his grandfather, and the values he lives by. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man he is." Maya shook her head, staring at me like I had lost my mind. "You seriously married some random girl while we were in Europe? Are you insane?" I held Elena's hand tighter and raised my voice so none of them could mistake my resolve. "While you were off pretending to be a perfect family for photos, Grandpa and I were building a real life here. Elena has shown me more kindness in 4 weeks than I have ever seen from you, Mom. And she respects Grandpa, which is more than I can say for the rest of you." Victor finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Evan, this is a lot to process. Marriage is serious. You should have waited for us to come back." I turned to him, anger simmering beneath my calm words. "Waited? The same way you waited at the airport while Mom humiliated Grandpa? The same way you stayed silent when she told him to go home like he was worthless? You don't get to lecture me about what's serious. You abandoned your own father-in-law to protect your wife's pride. I won't live like that." Clara's face twisted, her voice rising. "This is betrayal. You embarrassed us. You think marrying her makes you noble? It makes you a fool." Grandpa stepped forward then, his voice booming with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "No, Clara. The only embarrassment here is the way you treated your own father. I sold my land, I gave you everything I had left, and you tried to leave me behind like trash. Evan is the only one who stood by me. He gave me dignity when you tried to take it away. That's not foolishness. That's love." The yard fell silent. My mom's face burned red, her lips trembling with words she could not form. My sister turned away, shame flickering across her expression for the first time. My dad lowered his head, unable to meet Grandpa's eyes. I took a step closer to them, my voice steady. I didn't lose anything by missing Europe. I gained everything I actually needed. A wife who loves me. A bond, with my grandfather stronger than ever. And the strength to stand up for what's right. Elena's hand slipped into mine again, her eyes soft but unyielding. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder with pride radiating from him. Together, we stood as a new family, one that valued loyalty and respect over appearances and selfish pride. My mom muttered something under her breath, then yanked her suitcase upright with a jerky motion. "Fine. Do what you want. But don't expect me to celebrate this disaster." She stormed inside, my sister trailing behind. My dad lingered at the door, his eyes meeting mine with regret before he followed them. Grandpa sighed deeply, then smiled at me. "You did it, Evan. You stood your ground. Your grandmother would be proud." As Elena and I stood there with him, I realized that this moment, the confrontation, the shock, the truth finally laid bare, wasn't just about exposing my family's cruelty. It was about reclaiming the meaning of family itself. For the first time, I felt free. The house felt different after that day. The air no longer carried the same weight of control my mother used to hold over every room. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand in my own home and say what I believed. My decision to stay with Grandpa and marry Elna had drawn a line none of us could ignore. In the days that followed, my mother barely spoke to me. When she did, her words were sharp and cold. She acted as if my marriage was a stain on the family's reputation. She refused to acknowledge Elena and treated Grandpa as though he no longer existed. She strutted around with the same self-importance, but I could see cracks forming in her control. My sister Maya stayed glued to her phone. At first, she mocked me, telling her friends how I'd ruined my life by marrying a woman after only a few weeks. But there were moments when I caught her staring at Grandpa and her eyes softened with something close to guilt. She never apologized, but silence replaced the snide remarks. That was progress in its own way. My father was the most complicated. He had been silent at the airport and silent when my mother abandoned Grandpa. But after we returned from the courthouse, he began to linger in the evenings instead of hiding in his study. One night, he came out onto the porch where Grandpa and I were sitting. He looked at my grandfather for a long time, then said quietly, "I should have stood up for you. I didn't, and I regret it." Grandpa leaned back in his chair and nodded. "It's not too late to be better, Victor. You still have time." Hearing those words from Grandpa made me realize something important. He wasn't holding on to bitterness. Even after everything my mom had done, even after being humiliated in front of strangers, he was willing to forgive if someone showed genuine remorse. That strength, that grace, was something I knew I wanted to carry with me for the rest of my life. Life with Elena became a steady rhythm of simple joys. We cooked meals together in the kitchen, laughed over board games with Grandpa, and spent weekends exploring the parts of our town that most people ignored. She treated Grandpa like family from the start, asking about his stories, driving him to the lake when he felt restless, and even helping him keep up with his journal. She never saw him as a burden. She saw him the way I did, as a man who had given everything for the people he loved. Grandpa began to smile more. He started each day with a light in his eyes, excited to write another page in his journal. He no longer looked like a man weighed down by rejection. He looked like someone who had been restored, given back the dignity that had been stolen from him. The greatest change, however, came from within me. Standing by Grandpa at the airport had been a decision made in anger and instinct, but living with the consequences showed me the power of loyalty. I had given up the chance to see Europe, but in exchange I had gained a marriage, a renewed bond with my grandfather, and a clear understanding of what family truly means. I also began to see my mother differently. For years, I had excused her sharp words and controlling behavior as stress or personality. But after what happened, I realized that some people put appearances above people, and no matter how much you try, you cannot change them unless they want to change themselves. She may never understand why I chose Grandpa that day, but I no longer needed her approval. What mattered was the life we were building in the aftermath. Grandpa had found joy again. I had found love. Together, we had created something stronger than the false image my mother had been chasing across Europe. As the weeks turned into months, people in our town began to notice the shift. Neighbors who had heard whispers about the airport incident came by with quiet words of support. Some shook Grandpa's hand and told him he deserved better. Others congratulated me and Elna, saying our courage to stand by each other had inspired them. The truth was spreading, and it wasn't the story my mom wanted the world to hear. But that no longer mattered. We weren't living for her approval. We were living for ourselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold and pink, Grandpa sat with Elna and me on the porch. He looked at us with a proud smile and said, "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. You both showed up for me, and I'll never forget it." That moment stayed with me. Family is not defined by who shares your last name, but by who is willing to sacrifice, to stand beside you when the world turns its back. I thought missing Europe would be the greatest loss of my life. Instead, it was the beginning of everything I actually needed. A marriage rooted in respect and love. A bond with my grandfather that grew stronger every day, and the freedom to live honestly, without pretending for the sake of appearances. Looking back, I don't regret a single choice. If I had to do it all over again, I would still pick up Grandpa's bag at the airport and walk away with him. Because in that moment, I wasn't just saving him from humiliation. I was saving myself from a life where loyalty meant nothing. My grandfather spent $45,000 hoping to buy a trip with his family. He never got that trip, but he gained something priceless. The knowledge that at least one person would never abandon him. And in the process, I gained a life I never could have imagined. One built on love, loyalty, and the kind of family that can never be broken. That day at the airport changed my life forever. I thought I was losing an adventure, but instead, I gained a family that truly valued love and respect. My grandpa found his dignity again. I found a partner who shares my values, and together we built something far more meaningful than any trip across Europe could have given us. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in my place. Would you have walked away with your grandfather, or would you have boarded that plane? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this story powerful, please take a second to hit the like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of what family really means, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support helps us keep creating content that inspires, challenges, and connects us. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.